Working with your students' families is another habit, another area of habit that you can get into as a teacher that will help you. Working with your students' families can help build support for your learners, but it does require a lot of work on your part. It requires planning and it requires ongoing effort once you've decided that you want to work closely with your students' families. At times it will feel like you're putting a lot more into it than you're getting out of it, and sometimes that is the case. But there are occasions on which you will be very happy that you have the students' families not only knowing what's going on in your classroom, but on your side in terms of your desire to support students and their abilities to learn. One way to do that is to consider your own position on this question. What's the ideal relationship between teachers, you, and parents of students? What kind of relationship do you want to build with those parents of students in your classroom? Are you concerned with a hands-off relationship? In other words, would you like them just not to have much involvement in your classroom? Or further along that spectrum, would you like them to be aware of what's going on and support it, but not really provide any input? Would you like them to be aware of what's going on and support it and help out with homework? Would you like them to give you their own ideas of what you should be covering or how you should be covering it? Or to the other extreme, would you like them actively involved in your daily or weekly teaching routines, having a room parent or parents who come to the classroom to contribute their time or their expertise? So before you can communicate effectively with students' families, you need to answer this question. How involved do you want families to be with you? You don't always have total control over that, but you can certainly shape how that relationship is going to look at the very beginning of the school year. One thing to consider as you're thinking about that relationship is the idea of this ecological model. This hopefully is familiar to you from 245 if you are taking that or have taken it. Certainly we covered it very briefly in 260. You don't need to memorize the chart, but what it really means is that students do not exist in an isolated context. Students exist in a larger context. When you look at a student in your classroom, you are looking at someone who is shaped by a lot of forces, a lot of different things around them, including what Bronfenbrenner called the microsystem, which is the immediate, the things close to that student, family and school and peers. But that student is also shaped by the mesosystem, the exosystem, things like neighbors and mom and dad's work, cultural contexts in the larger macrosystem, and even the chronosystem, which is how things change over time. The point is, students are part of a larger context in your classroom, and family communication really does matter. It makes a difference. It matters for a number of reasons. First, as a teacher, you want to make sure you're sending consistent messages home and to students. You want to make sure that what you're saying is being heard by their families and you're saying it consistently, whether that is something like homework assignments or your expectations for academic achievement, or even just trying to get them to remember that there's a field trip coming up or that you're having a class party and everybody needs to bring something. Similarly, good family communication can help enlist cooperation and help from families. The more you communicate, the better you communicate, the more likely you are to have families on your side and willing to lend a hand. Family communication actually encourages good conduct, good behavior on parts of students. If they know that you have a direct line home to mom or to dad or to both of them, and that mom and dad listen and support what you're doing in your classroom, it's much more likely that that student will try to behave and not play you off of parents. In other words, go home with a story that the teacher is just so mean and these expectations are so high, that's why I keep getting these notes. Family communication helps by sending messages directly to the people you want to receive them. You can't rely on students as a go-between for important key messages, and so dealing directly with parents is really the only way to get some of those messages sent across. How do you do that? Well, it's up to you. There are a lot of different ways you can communicate with parents. Verbally, if you choose to use verbal communication, you certainly have an opportunity to talk to parents at back to school night. That is most of the time the first opportunity that teachers have to contact parents and to work with them. But you also will call parent conferences, whether regularly or not. You can talk to parents much more individually at these parent conferences. You can use phone calls if you need to, and increasingly we're seeing phone calls being used. For a little while we went through a period where it seems like more and more teachers were relying on email and letters home than they were just picking up the phone. But phone calls can actually be a very useful and relatively quick way to send a direct message to parents. There are also written forms of communication, whether it's email or the use of a website or even social media. Many teachers are being called on now to use social media, Twitter especially, but also Facebook and some of the other sites that are similar to Facebook, to communicate with parents. Many teachers have their own websites, usually hosted through the school, but certainly some teachers will be able to actually act as their own webmasters. And everybody uses email now, but you just have to remember that not all parents will read email. Think about some of the really long emails you get from different organizations. Even Longwood will send out a very long weekly email. And I don't know about you, but I don't read those. It's too much to try to take in. And so I think that's an example of how a message is being sent by someone who thinks she understands how she's sending the message, but she doesn't see that it's being received in a very different way. And there's also traditional written communication as well. So you can certainly write notes home, write letters home, use things like class newsletters, but use them sparingly. Parents, just like teachers, have little free time, and the more you bombard them with messages, the less likely they are to pay much attention. So you have to find a balance between making communication regular enough that parents expect it, but not so frequent that parents feel inundated or overwhelmed.